becoming aware and accepting your fate, and that the trickster is playing an important role in the fulfillment of your fate, the ultimate fulfillment of your fate, that is an important element of the transformation.
Hello, everyone. Welcome back to Soul Sessions with Creative Mind. I'm Deborah Barrett-Maldonado. I'm here with Dr. Rob Maldonado,
nice
founders.
To be here.
And we are so excited to continue our series on the great works of Carl Jung. But before we begin, I do want to mention that you can subscribe to our channel if you click here on the button in the corner if you're watching us on YouTube. Today's topic, we take great reverence in speaking about and honor, and we're talking about the trickster archetype. And since it's Halloween, it's the perfect time for trick or treat. I'm wearing orange in celebration of the orange holiday. And we're going to go deep into what is the trickster archetype? How do we love the trickster versus not love the trickster and embrace it for what it is?
Yeah,
and how it impacts our creativity and our creation.
Yeah, and again, an archetype is not so much of a character. A lot of people use it as a character, but it's a behavioral pattern that is part of our psyche, part of our collective unconscious. Where do we see it? We see it in mythologies. Myths often portray the trickster in his varied ways, all the way from a clown kind of figure that brings levity, irreverence.
The Joker, like when you were in school, there was always one kid who was the class clown, right? That everything's serious and they'd belt out a joke. Comedians, all the way to the devil, personification of evil or the darkness in the psyche. That's the trickster. And we're going to talk about, especially, and this is interesting for us, how does the trickster archetype play into creativity? Right? Because he plays an important role in human creativity, and often he's not acknowledged for that. And we misunderstand what the trickster's role is in creativity. I think the first that everyone can relate to, the most simplest example, is evolution.
Yeah.
That the cells have a random switch, the DNA, and then it creates a new kind of form in that animal. And then that could or could not be more adaptable. And that's how we evolved, is through this randomness of, let's throw a little curve in this. Instead of just making a solid copy after copy, if you think about all the species, we all came from a one-cell organism, and how all different we are. Even human beings, how we're all so different and so vast. It's how does that happen? We're not carbon copies of each other. We are close copies, maybe samples of each other, but there's always that little uniqueness to each one. And even our thumbprints, we have all very unique fingerprints, which is why we use that for crimes, because we can identify people. But also this idea that it creates a unique individual experience in a vast world. And so many, what I think fascinates me is when you go into those deep sea, those deep sea divers, and you see these creatures that you've never seen on the planet. And it's like, wow, the divine is so creative. It's a creative force. And how does it happen? Just a little shift of DNA and it becomes something new.
Yeah, random mutations.
Yeah.
So let's set up the stage first. What does the average person do with a trickster? Most of us are trying to get rid of the trickster. In other words, we're trying to create certainty, predictability, comfort.
No randomness, risk averse. The risk management. That's what our ego likes to do. Let's just lower our risks.
Absolutely. And that is an impossibility. It's an impossibility. So when we want to control things and we put most of our effort in trying to predict and control, we're pushing away the trickster element, the uncertainty principle, as it's called in physics. Simply the fact that we cannot control everything because we cannot determine in physics the speed or velocity at the same time of a particle. We can never do that. It's an impossibility so far.
So we can never create a life if we we all think if we just put everything in order and check all the boxes that everything's going to be okay.
Yes. So this pushing away, what it's doing is it is one of the sources of human suffering because we can never do it. And we're simply fooling ourselves. And the more we insist and the more we try, the more we develop mechanisms, technology, systems, organizations, on and on, to try to keep that chaotic element out of our psyche, out of our lives, the more power we are giving it to disrupt our lives. It becomes then an unconscious element that plays into what we do, the things that we create. So that if we're creating a business, guess what? We're building into it when we push away the trickster element. We're
trying to be too organized, trying to be too structured.
We're stifling it. We're building in its own destruction, essentially. What happens in relationships when we try to control it and determine the outcome? We stifle it. We suffocate it. We don't allow it to breathe, to grow, to be its own organic way of being.
Like a parent with a child trying to bulldoze through, making sure, the helicopter parent that makes sure the child doesn't have any problems. And then the child doesn't have the strength or within them to cope with problems when they're adults because the parent did everything for them. So it seems maybe it's nice to get rid of problems and avoid them. But in a sense, these trickster types, these obstacles, the drama that shows up in our life actually make us stronger. They build our immunity basically to our growth. And we start, it's just like the immunity, we get our shots so we can build the strength to fight off disease. It's the same thing. It's like we need to build that resilience within ourselves. If we don't, something's just going to knock us down when it happens, if we don't have the resources. I mean, I think also too, when people really design that predictable life that will never change, that will create boredom, a lack of passion, a lack of emotion, and it becomes blah. Like, remember that movie, The Truman Show with Jim Carrey? Remember they made this perfect choreographed life and he kind of woke up from it, what is going on? And he became that trickster. No matter how perfect they wanted to have this person, it just cannot be sustained. And when everything's so choreographed and so structured, it just becomes bland. And then we kind of seek it. In a way, we kind of invite the trickster in because we can't stand our own boredom anymore. How many times has that happened? I know for me with work, just being stuck in that corporate job, and you're just like, but I don't want to leave because this is practical and it's predictable, right? I can get that predictable income. And then the trickster came in and said, you know what? Let's just lay you off now. And now you're going to have to figure out what you're going to do with your life. And it seems like a terrible thing, but it also gives us that opportunity for reset.
Yeah, so this is an archetype that we're talking about. In the Jungian sense, the archetypes live in our psyche and the deeper aspects of our psyche. The archetypes essentially are Jung calls them, they construct the matrix of the collective unconscious. So if you think, what is the inner universe of the psyche like? It is built upon these archetypal structures that Jung started to identify, right? He put us on the right track of understanding this deeper aspect of the soul, the structure of the soul. So the trickster, he says, if you look at mythologies all over the world, he's always there. He's always there, right? If we look in our own backyard, Christianity, it's replete with this concept of the devil. He's a trickster figure, essentially. He's a trickster who is known as the liar, the spoiler, the cheater, the one that spoils and tempts people into committing errors, committing sins. Now, it seems, from let's say from the cultural perspective, it appears that we're talking about pure evil. But when you look at the trickster in other cultures, you get a better sense of what that archetype is about. So in Hopi culture, when the warriors were preparing for their initiation, they had to march through the center of the pueblo, the town, in a certain way and do certain things along the path, keeping a serious demeanor. While they were doing that, the tricksters, the clowns, were trying to distract them, help make them slip up, miss a step, forget what they were doing. That's the function of the trickster. One of the great functions is that they're going to test you. The trickster is going to test you to see what you're made out of. It's not evil.
It's almost like it can be harsh.
It can be harsh, Because if you misstep, right, it means all that preparation, all that dedication, everything you thought you were accomplishing is lost. But it helps you become a better individual, a better person, because it shows you exactly where you're at, what you're made out of. But it's the interpretation that if we interpret it as it's evil and I have to push it away and get rid of it and not look at it, we're giving it more power to really come in really important parts of our life, in relationships and work and spiritual life. It's going to come in then and do its spoiling in our most important events in our lives.
And then we end up, but we reset if we're open to the change versus that was a terrible event in my life. But we often touch on people who've gone through like a midlife crisis or an illness or loss of a marriage. And then they always say, at the time it was terrible, but now afterwards I see how I needed to go through that to be where I am now. And so when you're facing the trickster, you want to resist it instinctively because it doesn't feel comfortable. It doesn't feel right. You want to kind of control things. And it's almost like when you're wrestling with the chaos, and the more you try to control it, the more chaos. It's like you're almost like stirring it up more. And I know for me, like I like organization, and I know I would caught myself like in the beginning of working as a self-employed person and having my own business. The more I tried to control things and make sure things didn't happen, it was almost like I attracted more of that because I was pushing away. And so it's like welcoming that uncertainty and welcoming like things are going to happen. Like every day in your business, if you're a business owner, things are going to happen. And you just have to accept them and the challenges versus something's wrong because there's a challenge. It's like part of being an entrepreneur or part of being someone who's has a big goal in their life. You're going to reach obstacles.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So in the mythology of Christianity, going back to that theme, right, we see that Jesus as the symbol of the hero, right, of the self in transformation, is betrayed by Judas. He's a trickster element, right? Judas represents the spoiling element of the hero's journey. There's somebody opposing, somebody playing a trick on you that's going to spoil your plans. You're not going to be able to play out the scene in the smooth, perfect way that you intended. Now all this chaos is going to come in and you're going to have to deal with it. That's the trickster element. Now think about the power that we're giving it if we ignore that element. In other words, if we are unconscious of it, if we say, I don't want to look at it because I'm afraid of chaos. I don't want to admit that it's part of my psyche, of my process, of my growth.
Or just like ignoring it, something happened and you cover it up and it's just like, you don't want to look at it. You don't, like say your finances are messy and you don't want to look at that mess. So you're just like, keep going as if you're ignoring the problem. Well, it's going to keep coming back to you.
Yeah. So for the hero, for Jesus, there's an element where he's acknowledging that Judas is playing a role in his whole process.
And he knows it, like he knew, and he didn't stop him. Yes,
that the mythology essentially shows that becoming aware and accepting your fate, and that the trickster is playing an important role in the fulfillment of your fate, the ultimate fulfillment of your fate, that is an important element of the transformation. What is the transformation? In the metaphor of Jesus being crucified, meaning the biology of our being is transformed into a spiritual element.
From a human to into spirit.
Yes.
Or soul. It's like the awakening of the soul.
The old person must die in order for the new being to emerge, right? The trickster plays a central role in it. The other part in the mythology where the devil kind of plays an important role is where Jesus is in the desert undergoing his 40 days of fasting, and the devil appears to him and tempts him with a vision of power. You know, why do you want to do this when you can have all the power? I'll give you the power to be a king and be wealthy and be the leader of nations. Whatever you want is there for you. That's the temptation, right? That's the testing of your resolve. Do you really want this transformation? Are you serious about doing your personal dharma, your work? Or are you just in it for the fame, for the money, for the glory?
And only when things, you love your life only when it's good. And you don't want to, you resist any challenges and you don't see them as opportunities. That's the key. You know, another modern myth is Game of Thrones. Tyrion played the trickster in that show. He was always like, everyone was so serious and he'd always be joking around and getting drunk and just had like, you know, I know things and drink wine was his mantra. And it was just kind of like add levity to the whole serious situation of power and struggles and war. And so we always have, and if you notice in your family, there's always that one person, you know, that's the trickster that's always stirring things up in every group. And they could be light and fun and funny and be able to break the seriousness, or they can be really like kind of challenging you. And it could be someone in a group or a community you have that's kind of causing problems, because there's something that needs to come into consciousness. And so it appears as this problem person when it's actually pointing to an opportunity for you to become more aware and grow. And nothing enters our consciousness without us being a part of it. Like there is no randomness where there's this external person that's a problem and you're absolved from all connection and it's just that person's issue. It's always connected back to us. If we're having the experience, we are part of that experience. So we are connected to everything that comes in. So when these trickster elements come in, we have to kind of tap into our own inner the archetype of that trickster, the creativity within us that can, even in serious trouble, when we have something maybe devastating in our life, maybe an illness or a loss of a job or loss of a person that we love, it's bringing in that creativity of how can I turn this into something more powerful. So the trickster can have that devastating part, but also the trickster invites us to look at it in a creative way, in a different way, and life in a different way. So it's like we talked about in the last episode, there's no good or bad in the psyche. It's just a matter of balance.
Yeah. So in dreams, the trickster often shows up as someone who is spoiling the game. They might be a shady character. They might be a clown.
Sometimes it's a fox, right? Sometimes they come up.
Sometimes as an animal, a fox or a snake or a hawk or a bird of some kind. All these symbols that
the crow.
Yeah, the crow is a classic symbol of the trickster in many mythologies around the world. So this trickster element is going to show up in the unconscious mind or through the unconscious mind, but he's there to teach us, to help us. Again, if we read it as an evil omen or as something bad to get rid of, we're missing the point and we're misusing an opportunity or passing up a great opportunity for creativity, for growth, for transformation.
I have a funny story. When we first moved to California and we were in an apartment at first and we moved in, we had our office and then we got this new house we rented and it was a block from the beach. Remember that in Manhattan Beach? And I remember sitting on the deck and looking at the ocean, and it's something I always envisioned in my mind of how I want to see our business grow and where would I live, and living in this great place in this beautiful environment. And I was sitting out there and I was like, oh, I just feel so successful. And so like my dreams have come true and I'm with the love of my life. And then as soon as I had that thought, a giant crow just sits on the banister and goes, "Wah!" And I was like, okay, don't get too attached. This doesn't define you. And it just is that, like you see the trickster and you know the archetype, when it shows up even in physical form in your life, it's just your psyche talking back to you. Your inner world is always reflected in your outer world. And it's like, hey, don't take this too seriously. You're going to inflate your ego if you do that. So it was like, it's just a reminder, like, don't get too attached to the things that are bad, and don't get too attached to the things that are good in your life. Like everything's a ebb and flow. And so I thought that was a really simple lesson. Yeah. So that like just knowing that symbol avoided maybe some future catastrophe, because I started letting go of that great attachment or making this seem like I'm so great now because I have all these things.
Yeah. So how do we work with the trickster element? There's a beautiful poem by Rumi. It's called The Guest House. I'm not going to recite it or anything. I just want to kind of reference it as he's talking about inviting anything, any emotion that shows up, inviting it instead of judging it as either good or bad or toxic. They're just part of our psyche, right? The emotions, situations, symbols, people, work, everything that shows up for us, we invite it in. We accept it as this is part of my journey. This is no different than any other thought that I have. Come on in. Tell me more about what's going on. How can I learn from you?
And so it comes in the form of the uninvited guests, because we like, I didn't expect you to show up here, and then we invite it in. And so it often comes in the something that we do not want to call into our life, but it's meant to be called in. And we have to have that reverence for these unexpected things that may seem like negative things. And if you label them negative things and you keep pushing them away, it's just more stuff is going to show up. And then you feel more and more of a victim of life. And it just keeps compounding. It doesn't stop. It doesn't, okay, the event goes away and you're still living in that. And then it becomes that for you. But if it becomes that invited guest, then it becomes creative, because that's what you put into it. That's how you cope with it. But most of us are conditioned by our ego is to push away the negative, be the positive. And that's where positive thinking can get a little, like they call it toxic positivity, because you can get so trying to be so positive all the time that you are pushing away what needs to be seen. That's not so pretty and not so clean and a little messy. And we want to like be okay to look at that within ourselves and within others.
Yeah. Yeah, because anything we push away, again, we're giving it power over our life. And we're pushing it into the unconscious mind, which means it's going to have an impact without our awareness, without our participation in it. That's the real danger. The danger is not looking into the unconscious. The danger is not paying attention to the unconscious.
I know a lot of people like, oh, I'm afraid what I'm going to uncover in my unconscious. It's like, if you don't look, you should be afraid if you don't look.
That's right. And it's a natural process. Now, obviously, it's good to have a guide. We do need people that know what they're doing to guide us and teach us and help us. But it's a natural inclination in us to explore our own psyche, our own unconscious mind. So as we invite this chaotic element into our life, right?
Making friends with the chaos,
yeah. Accept it as part of our journey, that it's going to teach us, it's going to guide us, it's going to give us an essential part of our journey. It's going to teach us that. We have to be able to drop the negative and positive, right? The good and the bad.
And it's so hard. That's the hardest part, I think.
Why? Because the negative, positive function of the mind is ego. That's its job, essentially. It tells us whether something's good for us. Is this pleasant? Is this comfortable? Is this leading me to safety and warmth and all that? Or is it uncomfortable for me? Is it leading me into uncomfort, pain, etc.?
Tragedy.
When we live at that level, we're only in survival level. We're like in Maslow's hierarchy of needs, we're simply in the first level or a couple levels up of
food, shelter, and warmth, right?
Yeah, we're simply either survival mode or social fitting in, right? That ability to fit into society, to be accepted by others. It's an important function, but it's not the creative ability in our mind. It's not there. Creativity comes at higher levels where we're able to transcend our limited ego perspective and get into the higher mind, the higher aspects of the psyche. And that requires us to go beyond the ego. So when we're caught up in good and bad, right and wrong, toxic and non-toxic and all that stuff, we're simply in survival mode, and that's not going to do it for us. Once we start to accept that there's going to be a chaotic element, but that chaotic element brings creativity, then we see the function of the trickster. It gives us the creative power. It helps us participate in the creation of our own destiny.
Yes. I find that non-attachment relieves all stress. When we are stressed, we are attached. We have anxiety, we're attached to something. And I remember, I don't know, like you told me a long time ago when I am like, so like always wanting to control everything. This is like avoid the trickster at all costs. And I think when we first met, we first started working together and I was like worried. And you said, Deb, sometimes you just have to say, and you cursed, F it. And I was like, oh, that is so freeing. You know, it's just kind of like, not like you don't care, but it's like, I'm tired of controlling everything. You know, think about everyone listening. Like how many of you would just be like, oh, it's so freeing. I remember I was on my way to work the day I got laid off And I was thinking about all the things I had to do with that job. And I was just like, oh, I got to get this work report done, and I have to this done, and I have to, this boss I'm dealing with. And I was all this noise in my head. And then when I got to the office and I got laid off, like the layoffs happened like the first hour. And it was like all that stuff just went away. I didn't have to worry about it. And it felt so free. And I was like, oh my God, like I need this feeling all the time. And so how do we get that feeling? Because the mind will tend to kind of hitch onto those attachments of structure. Like you don't want to be completely chaotic where you have no vision and no structure, but there has to be a balance between structure and creativity. You cannot create anything all creative where you have no vision and no order, and you can't create anything from that strict, rigid structure. It needs to have that flexibility. So that was just really that feeling of when you said that, I was like, yeah. I mean, so many times when I worry about something, you're always like coaching me. And then I realized, oh, I'm worried about something that's like, who cares? Like, I was like, the first problem you're trying to solve. And then you kind of like, what am I really trying to solve here? And when you get to like the worst case scenario, you're just like, oh. And that's the value of coaching, because it's hard to do that on yourself because your ego's feeding you the narratives, and it's the inside job trying to keep you from seeing it. But someone else reflecting and really questioning your assumptions gets to that root, and so powerful.
Another mythology that's important in our understanding of the trickster is the Gita. So in the Gita, there's a great battle about to happen between these two powerful families that are at odds with each other. They're fighting for the kingdom, and Krishna is playing the role of the trickster. He's kind of an advisor, but as advisor, he's kind of egging on the battle because, again, it's part of what has to happen. But it's a metaphor, of course, for the internal battle within us, the battle between our lower nature, our ego, and our higher nature, our spiritual self, right? And that battle is represented in this mythology. Now, Krishna, what he advises Arjuna to do is to practice doing his duty with non-attachment. In other words, it's like you say, we're not dropping the ball and saying everything is chaos.
Just throw your hands up in the air. I mean, that's kind of, at first you have to do that, but then you take action with non-attachment.
Yes. Krishna advises Arjuna to do his duty to in the best possible way that he can. In other words, to be a warrior, to be the best warrior that he can be, but to do it with non-attachment, meaning you're not attached to the outcome. You have the right to experience your duty, to do your duty, but you don't have the right to its fruits, meaning to the result.
Well, it's like the creation process itself. I like to equate it to like drawing a picture. So if you're an artist, the process of creating is so beautiful, right? And then you're not really, but if you're writing or painting or writing any type of those creative arts, but if you're thinking, I want people to like what I'm doing, I want people to appreciate it, I want this to start to sell for $1 million, it's going to destroy your creativity because you're kind of stuck. But when you're in that, and we all feel that when whatever creativity we do, whether it's writing a business, coming up with strategies for a business, or coming up with paintings or sculptures or creative ways to work, when we're in that flow, it's sort of that non-attachment. We love the action itself. And I remember when AI first came out and you were like, oh, this is great. You could just use that to write your books. And I said, you don't know. I love the writing process. I love the process of writing. So I love the kind of push and pull of and digging into the creative force. Like there's something in me that is created from me. It's not about getting the end result, like just getting a book out there. It's about me like wrestling with my own mind and digging into my own creativity. And you have to love that about everything you do. And when you're pouring into that creativity, into being in the action and loving the action, not the result itself, that's when great results actually happen. When we're too tied to it being good or everyone liking it, then it ends up being the opposite often, don't you think?
Absolutely. Because whenever you are attached to the results, you're giving away your power. You're saying, I will be successful or I will be a failure depending on the outcome of an external circumstance.
It's like your identity's defined by it.
You're giving your power away to external circumstances, which is insanity, because we know the external world is always up and down. That's its nature. It's an ebb and flow, right? The tide comes in and goes out. The moon becomes full and then disappears.
One day you're on the A list, the next day you're on the D list or canceled.
Yes.
And, it's like if you get caught up in that, and a lot of like child actors, they got caught up in their fame and that money at such a young age. And they didn't have that development of like working hard to get things and the adult mind of the struggles. And then when they got older, that's when all the struggles started to happen. And they didn't know how to cope with it because they've always been praised, or they go through where they don't get any roles anymore. And then who am I? Because I was this big star and now I'm not. And so when we tie ourselves to external experiences to define us, we are a prison to it. And it becomes just even in corporate world, we have our title at work and we have, great salary and we have this great abundance. And then we're like, but I'm not the VP of social services. I can't let that role go away. That's who I am. And then you lose it. And then who am I? And a lot of people, when they get laid off, that's the first question they ask is, who am I? And when I got laid off, I knew, because inside I was already ready to leave. And I just needed the trickster to step in and kick me out and play that little role, because I knew and when it happened, I was like, I know exactly what I'm going to do. I know exactly what I'm going to do. And I'm just going to see what I'm made of. And that's really a beautiful way to live. It's like stepping into the unknown and knowing that no matter what happens, there's nowhere to fall. Like you're not going to fall. There's nothing there. There's always something to catch you.
Yeah. So in the myth that Krishna as the trickster is acting as the teacher. He's instructing Arjuna directly as to how to play the game without being caught up in it. In other words, without becoming imprisoned, like you say, imprisoned by the external circumstances.
Like always playing to win. Right? I need to win, or playing not to lose, but both are attachment.
Yeah. So what non-attachment does, it allows us to do our work in the best possible way that we know how, without falling prey to its results. That if the outcome is successful, we can celebrate and say, yeah, that's great. Let's do it again, right? We learn from it. But if it's not successful, we still learn. We still say, oh, this is interesting. It's like somebody experimenting. They're learning from their mistakes as well as their successes. In other words, the external is neutral. It's simply information. That relieves the conditioning, or it takes away its conditioning effect on the psyche. In other words, we're not tied to the results anymore. We're able to act in a completely free way without worrying about the conditioning effect of the positive and negative, the success or the failure. That's a very different way of being in the world, and it allows us to act in a creative way.
Well, it's almost like if you have a vision, it's not letting your ego have to make all the plans. It's like relying on your deeper inner self that already knows how to bring you there, and trusting in that. Like trusting that even this thing that throws you through a loop is actually a part of the path, and trusting that this showed up for a reason for me, and I need to see what that is and see where I can learn from it, versus my ego has to strategize, and the ego will strategize not to lose versus go toward what we really want.
Yes, and if we remember the uncertainty principle, then it's always at play. What's his name? It was an Oppenheimer. Heisenberg. So Heisenberg, the real Heisenberg, not the
drug dealer, meth dealer.
The real Heisenberg said, uncertainty is a fundamental element of the universe. In other words, it's not like just a side effect. It's built into everything we do. In other words, everything is constructed out of order and chaos. So if we cannot remove it from everything we're doing, what non-attachment then does is that it allows us to see the creative potential in the so-called mistakes or failures. What most people would call failures, we see them as opportunities to bring in that chaotic creative element. Not
invited in all the time. Like we don't want to be like, come on in and like invited in intentionally.
Well, it's there. You can't get rid of it. In other words,
but it's just being welcome to it. Not like I want some chaos to happen so I can have get the juice from it. It's more like that kind of expecting it will arise. So when you least expect it, and often in the most inconvenient time, it will happen in the most inconvenient time that something will come in. You know what happened in my life when I first got the book deal for Let Love In? A month later, my father got diagnosed with cancer. He was going through chemo and it was like a really serious time. And I had this like book I had to write. And it's almost like the trickster's like, you've been wanting to write this book forever? Well, we're going to throw in this wrench. Not that it created the cancer, but the way the trickster works is it starts to give you an excuse of why you shouldn't go forward. Like it'll use any event in your life to stop you. And it could be a simple thing or a big tragedy. And so, but what it did was it helped me focus. I kind of like, the book actually was a gift at that time because I would have been just worrying. And then this book gave me a purpose as I was going through that difficult time. And it was something I can pour myself into. And I remember feeling like when I was in that space, it gave me a reprieve from all the worry that I was dealing with, not to shut it out, but it gave me some space to like kind of channel some creative energy while this thing was happening. So of course we don't want to invite these tragedies into our life, but it's like, how can we use it in a creative way? And how can these things that happen, people get sick, people die, people leave us. How do we use that as an opportunity versus say, oh, well, I got to give up. We hear this so many times. People are like, one little thing happens in their life and it's the perfect excuse to stop. And so people that live their greatest dreams, don't let those things stop them and invite like the trickster in to say, okay, like this is really happening and I'm not going to let it stop me.
Yeah, but on the flip side of the coin, it also opens up opportunities that we hadn't even thought about in our planning and our vision, because we were simply going by what we've experienced in the past. And so we don't have access to all the possibilities, the infinite possibilities that exist in the universe. When we act through non-attachment, we're opening ourselves up to that there is this guiding intelligence that is beyond our rational mind, and we're tapping into it. We're including it in our actions. We're allowing
not excluding it, not trying to avoid it. Yeah. So non-attachment is the key, and then knowing that it's a part of life. Like just like we all shut away the fact that we're going to die. Like it's something that we see happen all the time, but in our mind we can't even think about our own death. Like pushing that away. It's like we have to accept that bad things happen in the world, or so-called bad things. Things are going to intervene with our beautiful plans. Napoleon Hill calls it the sly disguises of opportunity. When you're going for your dreams, you have a goal. There's always this thing that on the surface it feels like a bad luck, but on the inside it's really an opportunity, and it's in disguise, and we have to like be willing to face it, look at it, and ask ourselves deeper questions of what this brings up in us and how we can use it in a creative way. So this is an interesting episode. And so before we go, I do want to remind you to click on the subscribe button here on the corner. If you are watching us on YouTube, be open to change, be flexible, and everything with chaos is always an opportunity to be more creative.